Sorry, that looks like you got a lot going on this morning.
Just a little. Oh,
So
test.
I asked you last night if there was anything that I could have done for you last night.
That's good. There's nothing you could have done. Now, Amber already writes my sermons for me, so it's not like. So you'll notice there's not a lot of folks here this morning. We've got a lot of sickness going around. A lot of sickness. Already. Yep. I had that feeling last week, and that's why I said what I said. I had that feeling like this was going to ramp up, and so we're gonna. Hey, Trigva, can you go to the printer in the sound booth and grab the notes for this morning? So Kev texted me last night, and he's like, "Hey, wife's not feeling well. I don't know if I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna try." I'm like, "Dude, stay home. Stay home. We're not gonna play that game. We're gonna have everybody stay home and be healthy." And I appreciate Kevin's dedication, but so Ron is away at East Brunswick. They're doing something for his mom. So there's going to be some sort of, sermon and memorial that has to do with his mama. So that's today. Scott and Laura are out of town. Kevin and Mike are not feeling well. If you're on the church chat, you saw the church chat about Pete and Tammy. Pete lost a friend, struggling with that, and she's tired and things like that. And and Ray and Pearl are traveling. So this is great. I'm quitting. No, I'm just joking. Come on. This is actually the best time to pull together and say, you know what? How can we take advantage of a smaller group? You know what I mean? This is great. There's nothing wrong with this in the world. And we're going to have off Sundays. There were a few Sundays in 2020 and 2021 when it was just me and a video camera in here. And there were a few Sundays back in 2015 when it was just 4 or 5 of us meeting in the church nursery or whatever. You know what I mean? So we're actually, you know what? I never did meet in the nursery. I heard that y'all did. And then when I came, I said, no, we're going to have church on Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday nights. Yeah. And totally practical. Totally a good idea. What's that? Yeah, it's nice. And now we've got the chairs in the back doing pretty much the same thing. So yeah, y'all were a few years ahead of me. So I do like our Wednesday meetings. So I know there's only a few of us in here. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but any blessings, anything you want to? I know that, boy, I tell you what, there's sickness, there's heavy hearts, it was just pouring last night. I got very little sleep comparatively. I heard this extremely loud crash of thunder and woke up, but it coincided with, and if I heard it, it was loud. My hearing aids come off, And it coincided with, I think, Bella knocking on our door or something in the morning or in the middle of the night. And so all this hearing impaired guy heard was a crash of thunder followed by things happening, like knocking or something. And so I got up, put on my robe, put on my hearing aids, glasses. And I said to Amber, I said, boy, that was a pretty significant one. And I think she just agreed with me because it was 2 a.m. So it was one of those times when I woke up, I was like, please be 5:30 or 6. Please be 5:30 or 6. I don't want to go back to bed. But it was 2, so I had to go back to bed. Anyways, so I walk around the house. I open the door. I check outside. I'm thinking, what fell on our house? I actually thought for a second, did lightning strike our roof? Did something fall off the house? I stepped out I didn't step onto the deck because I would have gotten soaked. I'm looking out there. I'm like, no, there's nothing. So I went back into the bedroom after a few minutes and I said, babe, what was that? She goes, what? So the thing I just mentioned to you, when I walked out of the room, boy, that was a really big, but I didn't explain it to her. She's half asleep, 9/10 asleep. And she's actually home with the bear right now, who said he was feeling some stomach pressure. So we just want to make sure that's nothing before he comes over. But so anyways, she was like, that wasn't a particularly loud one. It was just thunder. Nothing else happened. I'm like, what? She goes, Bella was knocking on our door. Is that what that was? Maybe, I don't know, right? And so, what's that? It felt like, it really sounded like a SWAT team. Yeah. And I really was having the most entertaining dream. It was so odd and funny, and it's just really interesting. So I don't know what happened there, but I was planning tickets for something, and I discovered that we all got our own hotel room as opposed to having to share it with some other smelly guy. And I was so thrilled then the rest of the dream kept going, and there was a dispute about something. It was a funny one. And you ever try to remember your dreams like 10 minutes after, and you can't remember it when you could 30 seconds after? How funny is that, right? Anyway, it was the most interesting dream, and I thought, my goodness. So all of that to say this, I am tired. It was a rainy, dreary night. The sun's not out really, and I've talked to enough of you this morning where I said, okay, there's definitely some, this isn't a game show atmosphere kind of day, right? We get that. We've had a few of these this year. This is not a bad thing. This is what church is for. And interestingly, my Bible study hour message and my morning meeting message are out of Acts 27 and 28. And we're going to finish up the book of Acts this morning. And it's going to be, the overarching theme is going to be a study in God's providence and sovereignty, even when things look like they're a shipwreck and sometimes actually are a shipwreck. There really is a divine purpose. And we can see that. We can see that in the scriptures. And we know that God doesn't change. We know that God doesn't fail. And for those who are the called according to his purposes, Paul was not writing out of ignorance when he said that all things work together for the good of them. Like, he wasn't just guessing. He had lived it. And he calls on his life experience. The Holy Spirit points out his life experience to us, that we can reflect on it and meditate on it and say, I commit to trusting the God I cannot see with the things I cannot control. And that is very different. I got a CT scan tomorrow morning, and they say it increases your risk of cancer, blah, blah, blah. And of course, it's going to be thousands and thousands of dollars. So I'm already an inch away from canceling it. So I got a bunch of things on my own horizon that I'm not super crazy about, that I don't know about. You know what I mean? So this is needful for me, and I know that this will benefit you in this room. Now, if you showed up with a big old smile plastered on your face and it's genuine, good. Keep smiling. If it's fake, wipe it off and be real, because we're going to be real this morning. There's about 15 of us in this room, and we're going to be real this morning for sure. All right. Any blessings? Prayer? Yeah, Fred. Tennessee Vols won yesterday. I know. Oh, okay. Yeah. No.
No, it does have to do with us being over there last night. Just the cute moment when Jasmine and Trig were playing on the floor, and she squealed because she was so excited and it hurt his ears, so he jerked his hands over his ears, and Jasmine just started giggling. Just seeing her getting that little sense of humor where
yes.
things actually funny and laughing at them it was a really sweet moment. Get to have that happen with her cousin.
Her cousin. I never had any cousins growing up, so to watch my children have cousins is really cool. What's that? Count your many blessings.
Well, it's actually pluses and minuses too. Those cousins.
Oh man, boy, that's good advice, Ice Clean. It is good advice. Yep. So the Tennessee Vols did play yesterday. Corey and Ariel and Jasmine came over, and listen, you guys know I already think I'm pretty great. So this only made me feel better about myself. I predicted just about everything in that game from the very beginning. I did, and I was right. And if the coaches had listened to me, they would have played even better. So just something to consider for next time. Reach out to the Tennessee Vols. And no, I don't really watch. It was the only college football game I've watched, I think. Well, it's been that long. In fact, I don't even know if I've watched a college football game in its entirety.
It's Syracuse place?
Oh, yeah, they play and they win and they dominate and they conquer and they lead. But I didn't even watch Syracuse. I like college basketball. That's kind of my thing. So anyway, it was a really interesting thing. And Trig was like, he goes, yeah, this is clearly kind of watching, the little kids play compared to the adults when you compare it to the NFL. And I was like, that's a very apt observation. But Corey's counter is a worthy one, that in the NFL there might have a little bit more to do with money than there is a love of the game, maybe. I don't know, And I know the college students are playing for the potential to play in the NFL, but there does seem to be something a little bit more pure about the college students playing. So that was fun. We had a good time yesterday. That's my blessing. That was neat. We had a very relaxing day yesterday. Not a whole lot of pain in my side and back yesterday. Not really hardly any today. So maybe it's clearing up. Maybe I can call and cancel the CT scan only to have it come back on Tuesday. Who knows? So we'll see. Any other blessing, Thanksgivings, Core?
I've got someone at work that I feel like I've been able to talk with, and hopefully they'll eventually come to church. And it's just exciting because I've never actually, because I don't like to push people into coming. So it seems like every time I'm like, hey, you can come to church, you know, and just mention it, they never do. So this time I feel like, you know, they may show up today, they may not, but I feel like I'm that close because
that's awesome.
At least I got a text back.
There's been a fella from work who's been promising to come to our church for a while now, and Kevin and I are going to work on him again this week. And he's one of the guys who's up in Maine for the summer, and we're going to get him to come on out. He's gone to Mass Church. He needs to come to ours, and then maybe move to Maine and stay in ours. Yeah, I'm really glad you have a friend who's considering coming. I hope he does. Hope he does. Let's continue handing out those little palm-size invitations. I think they work. I do. I think they work, and they raise awareness of the church community. That's very good. Any other Thanksgivings, blessings, Kim?
I want to praise God for his faithfulness and for his comfort.
Man.
The longer I live,
Wow. Yeah.
the more I see it.
Yeah.
And also yesterday, my sister is great. She took me out shopping
Hmm.
to get some clothes. And she has good fashion sense.
Sure.
And
Sure.
she shopped for my mom and
Yep.
and we just had a really good sisterly time.
That's really neat. Praise the Lord for that. It's like Ecclesiastes chapter 9 says, right? There's things that are way out of our control, but what is in our control? To enjoy our labor under the sun, right? And to honor him while doing it. That's how to do that. Ecclesiastes 9:27, I believe. Eileen?
Oh, yeah, 2 nights ago, I had a partial seizure.
Yeah.
And, I felt, my heart skipped like a beat.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very quick, like I told my mom, it was just like that.
Yeah.
Stimulator, and I cut it in half. Like
Nice.
in half.
Good.
Didn't let it move to pick up.
Very good. I like it when technology works the way it's supposed to. That's good. Adam?
It's nice to be able to get back to work and
Yes.
swing things. And I think a goal of mine this year is to get into getting serious with getting my driver's license and permit and stuff.
Yep. I think that's achievable. I think it's terrifying, but I think it's achievable. I'm just teasing. It's scarier for me to drive. I promise you. Brian?
I remember I had a dream maybe a month ago or so, and it was just a voice that I heard in the dream that said, I will bless those who keep my commands. And for a long time, I've had this verse on my heart, even before I knew it was a verse, before I read it. And that's Ephesians 5:11. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, that sentiment has led me on a course, and also a lot of blessings.
Amen.
And we're having an upcoming fair at our property, God's property, that he lets us stay at in Bowden. And I believe that's some of the blessings that have come out of obeying God's command.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people getting involved in this fair, and it's just going to be a really, really great time. That's on the 23rd of September. And so it's a real blessing. It's almost, it's indescribable, all the things that have come together to make that happen, and the things that I see, the little God winks in all of this.
Yeah.
I can't even describe it.
That's awesome. Now, what date is the Common Sense Fair, Brian?
That's going to be on the 23rd of September.
23rd.
From 11 to 6 p.m.
So, and I'm thankful to be able to, I'll be praying over the food, which is a good Baptist pastor role. So that'll be good. And I'll be attending, and we're looking to potentially have a booth for our church there. And we're going to support the Common Sense Fair in that way, just to have, the handouts and just some information about our church. Because I think our church reaches a lot of the people who are alienated from some of the more mainstream movements, because we just want the truth. We want the truth. And we're deliberately neutral when it comes to all the extras. Even our statement of faith online, if you pull it up, the very first statement in it is something to the effect of, this statement of faith deliberately excludes, any cultural issues, any extras, anything that's not explicitly stated in the Bible. So it's a pretty short one, to be honest with you. It's a pretty short one. I did include, and I added them as addenda, about human sexuality, because while that is cultural, it is explicitly addressed in Scripture in the inverse, and that's an important one to have in your statement of faith these days. Unfortunately, it protects you from lawsuits and all the Jack Phillips the Baker stuff. So, all righty.
Where are you located from?
165 Adams Road. Right off the road.
Okay.
I'm actually going to pull up the live stream, not to watch myself. Oh no. But sometimes folks will chime in if they're away, and I know we have plenty of folks away. So here's that. Where's our comments? No. Come on, people. When it works. There we go. Ron and Ray and Rozzy, thank you for watching and for tuning in. And to the others who haven't commented, if you're here, drop a like and subscribe. No, I'm just joking. That's what YouTubers say. All right. So we're going to be jumping into Acts 27. But before that, we're going to sing on a low register, a relaxed tone for this morning, the first verse and refrain of Count Your Blessings. Count your blessing. So let's sing that. If you don't know it, it's 564. If you do know it, but you're terrified you're going to mess up while you're trying to lead it to a group of people, it's 564. Let's sing that together. When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. And Kevin wasn't even here to appreciate the low register. All right. I'm sure he's appreciating it from home. I hope. No, he is. He is. He has to listen to make sure I don't preach some heresy that contradicts some of his teaching. I'm telling you, if he wasn't going through 2 Peter here soon, we would have been in 2 Peter like 5 through 17 on Wednesday night. Boy, there's so much good stuff there. So, Acts 27. Acts 27. I don't necessarily have a title, but the theme of this Bible study is going to be, Kevin says, I heard you. The theme of this Bible study is going to be Acts 27. The theme, I'm so sorry, is a study in providence and sovereignty. And I want to go through this chapter with you. And basically, I just have some notes on some verses, and it'll be kind of more of an expository commentary for a Bible study hour kind of thing, rather than more of a sermon format or expository preaching. But Acts chapter 27, don't know why I went past 2 Corinthians. You can tell I'm still a little tired. We're going to be verse 1. I got it right here, my brother. Trying to take it easy on it just because I don't know what's going on with the gut and I don't want to mess it up. But they say as long as you don't drink too much, it's actually very good for you. So, yeah, it could be the case. All right, so we join Paul on his way to appeal to Caesar. You remember the last statement last week that we heard Agrippa say? It wasn't almost you persuaded me to be a Christian. The last thing he said it to Festus, and he said, this guy might be a free man right now if he had not appealed to Caesar. But why did he appeal to Caesar? There's a couple of reasons that I think are in other words, I don't think it's just one reason. Anybody have any thoughts or remembrance of why he appealed to Caesar? Red? That's like the big one. That's the big one, right? Because the Jews had made a plot that if Paul was able to return to Jerusalem to be sentenced, he was going to be killed. Imagine this. Imagine you commit a crime in Redmond, Washington, right? And there is no Zoom, there is no Skype. You actually have to go there for your trial and sentencing, right? And you go to Redmond, Washington, and they say, look, I don't really get the whole, and I'm so sorry, you commit a crime in Maine, and you go to Redmond, Washington, where the big tribunal is, right? And they say, look, we're not really well acquainted with your crime here in Redmond, Washington. We're on the other side of the United States. We're going to send you back there and de-escalate this so that the local courts can have a tribunal. Does that make sense? That's kind of what was the idea. And so Festus, yes, right, Felix Festus. I told you I wouldn't remember, although I did say a year from now, not a week from now. But anyways, Festus put him in prison and was hoping to get a bribe from him for how long? How long was Paul languishing in prison? Anybody remember? 2 years. I feel like Red deserves candy after this. She really answered a couple just like boom, boom. People say there's like mommy brain. No, she's only gotten quicker, faster, stronger. You need to catch up. Okay. So, no, you want to look at these? No. Mm-mm. If they were like Mountain Dew flavored Werther's Originals, I bet you'd go for them. Ugh, that was gross. All right. So, wow. That's a terrible, Peeps. Ugh. So he was in prison for 2 years. And so I think perhaps another aspect to why he appealed to Caesar was because it was just not going anywhere when he was in Festus's court. Festus was probably going to keep him there for as long as he possibly could to drag it out to hopefully get a bribe. All right. So there's a couple of factors, Ralph.
He also knew that he was supposed to be involved.
That's a huge, huge factor because Paul believed with all of his heart, and we're going to see here today why I think he was right, that he was supposed to be in Rome. So sending him back to Jerusalem was going back to point A, not to point B. And so I think those 3 points to combine is all the reason we need to understand Paul's line of thinking and saying, I want to go see Caesar. Interestingly, Caesar would not have been very acquainted with Paul's crimes, especially not half as much as somebody like Agrippa was. Agrippa was well acquainted with what Paul was going after. In fact, 2 out of the 3 people who stood with the ability to condemn or free him were well acquainted, at least 2 out of 3, with Jewish customs and laws. But Caesar, we're talking like Rome, all Rome, nothing but Rome, total Rome. So Paul was going to be judged as a Roman citizen if he went to Rome. If he was going to be judged as a Roman citizen, he would have a higher likelihood of going free. However, Caesar didn't know this guy from Adam. So it's still a little bit more up in the air. Can you kind of see where Paul's at this point? It's like going before a judge who doesn't know you, who might just want to get you out of his courtroom and might just behead you because he's feeling a little bit more inebriated that day. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a little bit more unpredictable. You say, well, the Roman laws were a little bit more consistent than that. Yes, I know, but there were also things like assassinations of emperors. So I'm not exactly quoting their constitution as some sort of, consistently ordered thing. So anyways, I'm just kind of using my imagination and see what's going on in Paul's mind. So in verse 1 of chapter 27, and when it was determined that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius. Now, Julius is the captain of Caesar's cohort. What's a cohort? Well, it's a band of soldiers, right? So Julius is a captain. That's going to play into a decision that he makes later when he's on the boat. Julius is a captain. He is the big shot. He worked hard for his promotion, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, they went to, I even actually wrote out the pronunciation so I wouldn't mess it up, but now I don't even see what I was doing. Adramitium, there it is, because normally you're supposed to put in all caps the syllable that you're putting the emphasis on, and I did not do that. But they went to Adramitium. They were accompanied by Mark and Aristarchus and Luke. You say, how do you know? Well, while he was in Roman prison, we're going to talk about this in the 10 o'clock hour, while he was in the Roman prison, he wrote letters. And in those letters, he said things like, Mark is with me, Aristarchus is with me, Lucas is with me. And then he actually mentioned one other guy. Bonus points if you know this guy's name. It's really short. It's not a complicated name, but it shows up at least twice. One in a very good sense, another in a very bad sense. It was so close. Demas. So in the end of one of his prison epistles, he said, yep, Aristarchus, Mark, Luke, and Demas are with me. And then later in one of Paul's letters, you read, Demas forsook me, having loved this present world. Some interpreters have said, well, it meant he loved the world like Jesus loved the world. But I don't think that's how Paul was using that. I think Paul was being very clear that Demas had deserted him in love for the world. So he went to Adramyttium. He was accompanied by these traveling companions. In verse 3, we read the next day, they touched down at Sidon, and Julius gave Paul shore leave. He said, Paul, I want you to feel free to go out and enjoy Sidon. Like, that's awesome. That's liberty, which I think only reinforces the fact that Paul is being treated more fairly as a Roman citizen than the Jews were mistreating him as some sort of rebellious Jew heretic. Does that make sense? So we're seeing a little bit more of the royal treatment, literally speaking. Now, verses 4-8 is when the adventure kind of starts to take off. This is really cool. So they launched from there. They sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And if I'd had more time, and I did not have time, obviously last night was when Kevin told me about Sunday school. And it's plenty of time for me to try to prepare a lesson or something I want to go through with you, but not enough time to do a really cool map. Oh. But the map would have been cool. So just picture it in your head, the little Indiana Jones trails that we've been doing, you know. So they sailed under Cyprus, right? The winds were contrary. And when they sailed over the Sea of Sicilia and Pamphylia, they came to Myra, a city of Lycia. Now, from there, a centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us on that ship. From this verse, it would be 3 months before they touched down in Syracuse. Not Syracuse where I'm from, Syracuse, Italy. It would be 3 months from this day, because he later said at the very beginning of chapter 28. But from there, the centurion, he found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy, and he put us on that ship. Verse 7. And when we sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone. And hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lycia. Now, what we're seeing is stormy weather. Stormy weather. So in Acts 27, you kind of read about what's going on, verses 1-3, and then in 4, the narrative begins where Paul and his traveling companions are experiencing stormy weather. You say, yes, of course, we know how this is. I really want to help you. I want to encourage you to not think about bad weather as if you're thinking about it today. If you're on a cruise ship and you end up encountering bad weather, there is a very small chance that the ship will rock so violently that a table would fall over. If you are in the 1st century AD and you encounter bad weather on a ship, there is a very small chance you will live. Completely different things. Does that make sense? Like for the CT scan, I've been looking up statistics of all kinds of things about the CT scan. My chances of this adversely affecting me and giving me cancer 10 years from now are 0.05%, or 1 in 2,000. That 1 in 2,000 looks really big to me right now. You know what I'm saying? It's significant. I don't like it. I don't like the fact that I'm voluntarily exposing myself to radiation just so they can tell me nothing's wrong with you. Here's a bill for $4,000 that I'll be paying off for the next 4 years. Chances are pretty good Michael's going to call and cancel the scan today, by the way, just so you know. Anyway, so I don't like the idea. And what happens is a small percentage becomes a very big percentage when fear is involved. Do you guys remember when there's another ship story? And the disciples were all on the ship, and Jesus is sleeping. And the disciples go, Master, don't you even care that we're about to die? Okay, that to me sounds like somebody who's never met Jesus. Are you understand what I'm saying so far? That sounds like somebody who's never met Jesus. That sounds like somebody who thinks that Jesus is just some mercenary or some bad shepherd, not a good shepherd. And so they go and they wake him up and they say, don't you care that we're about to die? Don't you care about my present situation? And Jesus is saying, guys, I told you we'd reach the other side, right? And here's the thing. We look at Jesus calming the sea as a great miracle, and it is. But I wonder if maybe it would have been a better lesson for them just to know that they can sail through the storm instead of having it stopped for them. Because if they hadn't woken him up, I don't think they wouldn't, you know what I mean? He wouldn't have had to do anything. But Jesus said, we're going over to the other side. Anyways, so they wake up Jesus, and when I preach on this text, I preached on this text a few times in my short life, and here's my conclusion. I know, she doesn't like my preaching very much, I know. Try your best to stay tuned if you could. Here's my conclusion. The degree of hardness in our hearts toward the providence of Christ is proportional to the degree of fear that we feel in these present circumstances.
Yeah.
Jesus literally said, your hearts are hard. That's why you're afraid. That's a hard pill for me to swallow. Are you hearing what I'm saying? That's a hard pill for me to swallow. When I'm afraid of something, that is Jesus saying to me, your heart is hard. Now, that doesn't mean I'm sitting here stiff-necked and rebellious against God. Are you following? It does mean, though, that I'm failing to recall God's power, giving me more cause to cower. How's that for a homiletical idea? You understand what I'm saying? Failure to recall God's power will cause the strongest saints to cower. You say, well, I'm more mature than that. Yeah, well, sometimes even the most mature saints can fall into these little valleys of fear. Why? Because sometimes we get going and we, well, kind of like another ship story. Can I bring another ship story into view? When Peter stepped out of the boat and he took his eyes off Christ, and that's when he began to sink. Peter wasn't afraid. God, guys, I know this sounds like a storybook. I know it sounds like a kid's application here, but I'm just saying, Peter wasn't afraid as long as he was looking at Jesus. But when he took his eyes off Christ and put his eyes on the storm, he began to fear. Steve? 365. Yeah. Yeah. Over 360 times, Jesus tells people, don't be afraid. God tells people, don't be afraid. So anyways, I want to tie it back to the text here. So there's really, really, really rough weather. People are afraid. But look at what Paul says in verse 9. Now, when time was much spent, and when sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them and said to them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. He says, don't keep going. Stop. That's wisdom, right? Are you with me? That's wisdom. That to me is not Paul going, oh man, I'm terrified. That's Paul. Oh, I was going to go into this here before. I'm going to take a time out here. I think Paul was an extremely experienced navigator and sailor. I'm not going to get into all my conclusions for that. And part of it ties into the fact that what we call tent making in the English is the exact same possibility in the Greek as a sail maker. I think Paul made sails. You say, I want to dispute you on that. We can do that this afternoon. Call me. We'll talk about it. And I'll have plenty of time to tell you why I'm right. No, I'm just joking. But I think Paul made sails. And I think one of the reasons Paul made sails because that's what he was good at. I think he navigated well. I think he knew how to sail. And if you look at all the details, I think Luke and Paul knew a lot about boats and ships. And I think Paul he licked his finger, held it up to the sky and said, you know what? I don't like the look of this. He told people not to go. But look at verse 11. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken of Paul. The master and the owner of a ship, it's an old Greek word that has to do with what we would call the captain of the ship. It comes from the same root of the word nautilus or nautical, and it's the boat captain. And so one captain to another, this captain says, I think we've got this. I mean, I like this Paul guy. He's smart, but he should probably just kind of stay in his lane. You know what I'm saying? Listen, sometimes, and not all the time, guys, please don't get me wrong here, not all the time, but sometimes, sometimes basic wisdom or a word from God is going to trump your occupational experience. And I don't think you understand. I've been building computer chips for 45 years, and I'm not saying that I know how to build computer chips. But if I see something on the horizon that is like a common sense danger, you know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes we should listen to people and put our pride aside despite our experience and our rank. Hear me on this. Sometimes our power and our promotions and our prestige will get in the way of our attentiveness to people's warnings. Or can I add another P word? Our pastorate. Pastors are the hardest people to correct. Present companies. No, come on, guys. Pastors are the hardest people to correct because we're leading a flock. We're trying to steer a ship. And somebody comes up and says, hey, preacher, right? I think that was a pretty rough move. I have seen it. I have experienced it. I have been on the receiving end of some pretty rough words when I try to lovingly say, hey, have you thought about this option? Ooh, maybe you have too. Hopefully not by me. If it's by me, tell me. I need to confess and apologize to you. I'll repent. I'll repent in a heartbeat. There's a lot of, We can take all those P word, prestige, power, promotion, pastor, and replace it with another P word. Are you ready? The word pride. Our pride can get in the way of listening to some really sound advice. So one captain to another, this captain said, nope, we're not going to do it. We're going to keep going. All right. So verse 12, because the haven wasn't commodious to winter in, they could have done it. It just wasn't as nice of an experience. They didn't think it would work. They didn't listen to Paul. So they left, hoping to get to Venice by winter, which is the haven of Crete, and to the south and northwest. So they sailed close by Crete. Verse 14, there arose a long and tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught, couldn't bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. This is basically verses 13 through 20. My scholarly notes on verses 13 through 20 read as follows. Hey, Paul was right. That's what I have written down. Hey, Paul was right. So they're exceedingly tossed. The third day, they cast out with their own hands the tackling of the ship. They lost stuff in that ship because they didn't listen to Paul. All right, verse 20. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest laid upon us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. Verse 21, I have more scholarly notes for you. They're very sagacious and wise. Verse 21, my notes say, told you. Look at verse 21. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, sirs, you should have listened to me. Now, I thought it was very unchristian to say, told you so. But Paul here proves me wrong. This gives Christians license to say, I told you. No, it doesn't. All right, listen. He said, you should have listened to me, and you shouldn't have loosed from Crete to have gained us harm and loss. Verse 22, though, is a really cool turnaround. He says, cheer up. We're going to make it, but it is going to come at a cost. You didn't listen to me the first time. We are still going to make it, but now it's going to come at a price. Look at the next verse. I exhort you, be of good cheer. There's not going to be a loss of a single person's life on this boat, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, don't be afraid, Paul. You got to be brought before Caesar, and God has given thee all them that sail with thee. In other words, what God has given you, God's given the other 276 people on this boat. One of my titles for this lesson was the 276ers, but it didn't ring. All right, so anyways. So, verse 25, he says, so as a result of what I've told you, wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. However, verse 26, we must be cast upon a certain island. In other words, it's going to be okay, but it will involve us running aground. Look at what happened in verse 27. This is the 14th night of this storm. They're driven up and down in Adria about midnight. The shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. Hey, we're getting close to land. And sounded and found it 20 fathoms deep. When they went a little further, they sounded again, found it 15 fathoms deep. All right. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. So what was the result of their fear? Hasty actions and hoping. You know what I'm saying? They said our options are just to do stuff really quick without thinking and just to hope for the best.
So it was getting deep, so they decided.
It was getting shallower, and they were concerned that they were going to run aground. But here's the really tricky part. Didn't Paul say that that's what was going to have to happen? So why the fear?
They didn't believe it.
They didn't believe in the guy. I don't know. Interestingly, it actually wasn't until after all of this happened that they were able to eat. So you know they didn't really put their full faith in Paul. Anyways, look at verse 30. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea, under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, if you get out of the boat, you will die. He says this, except you abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. He says there is the promise of security, right? There is the promise of salvation, and it's in this boat. There is no other boat under heaven whereby you might be saved. Come on, guys, are you with me? Stay in the boat. Stay in the boat. Well, I used to be in the boat. Please listen to this very carefully. Their belief, you say, I believe Paul, I believe Paul. Yeah, but you're getting out of the boat, so you don't really believe Paul. You know what I'm saying? Faith without works is dead. Following me? I believe Paul. Paul is the ship's captain and this other captain. They I trusted them for a while, but now Paul said the thing about the thing, and I'm all in with Paul. He's the one I'm trusting. But then you get an opportunity to throw some lifeboats in the water and do your own thing and literally, quite literally, plot your own course, and you hop in the boat to hope for the best. And guys, they only thought they were by land. It was still 15 fathoms deep. One translation actually called it the equivalent of like a sandbar. So they were putting their anchors down and ready to hop into lifeboats because they thought they were right next to some land, but they were going to die in the storm if they'd gotten out of that boat. There's been a lot of messages and a lot of application that has to relate to salvation and eternal security from this passage. And I think there's actually a pretty appropriate allusion there, or I should say illustration there. I do. But for the sake of staying in the text and staying in the context of what we're talking about this morning, I'm going to summarize these verses this way. Shaky sailors, scared silly, sneakily, silently slink, but unsuccessfully give the slip. It only took like 10 seconds, which I'm very embarrassed about. It just came to me. Anyway, the S's and the P's are the easiest to alliterate. It's true. All right. So verse 31 is this. This is Paul saying, remember, there is a condition to the promise of safety. There is. There absolutely is. Paul literally said in verse 22, I exhort you to be of good cheer. There will be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. On this ship, people will live until the ship breaks apart. And then they go, well, I believe Paul, and I'm really thankful I listened to him. But now my experience tells me that now's a good time to put the ships in the water and start sailing away because I've been through this a lot. But Paul says, your experience is no substitute for the divine revelation from God. People were putting boats in the water saying, I have found something that works for me. People were putting boats in the water saying, this resonates well with my intuition. Sailors were putting boats in the water saying, my experience says I should do this. And while I appreciate the preacher, he's not exactly a sailor. And what they didn't know, I am sure they didn't know it, that Paul was quite experienced in the ways of navigating the sea. I'm sure of it. By the way, if you've been following along, Paul has been on boats for the last several years of his life. And if you read some of his letters, there's one that says, I've been through several shipwrecks. Can you imagine flying a lot and then being in 3 separate plane crashes and making it? Guys, all it takes is enough of turbulence for me to go, nope, 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 nope. If the oxygen mask ever fell, just during a steep descent, I would quite literally have a stroke. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't do it. And so Paul's in these airplanes and they're crashing over and over again. Paul has flown. Paul has been on airplanes for several years in a row. He is a road warrior. I think he's qualified to give a little bit of advice, even outside of the direct revelation of God. But now you have God speaking through this man saying, stay in the boat. You're going to be safe. You're going to be saved, is what the text says in verse 31, if you stay in the boat. Verse 32, they made a very wise decision. My scholarly notes on verse 32 are as follows. Got it. Our bad. It's true. That's what they said. Look at verse 32. The soldiers cut off the ropes and let her fall off. Anyway, so while the day was coming on, Paul said, look, eat something. This is the 14th day that you have not eaten. You ever had so much depression and struggle that you haven't eaten or drank anything for days? I have. You say, no one ever feels like that before. Are you kidding me? That's like reaction number 1. Your body just goes into survival mode and you don't eat or drink. You don't hardly need anything to eat or drink. So Paul says, please eat something, drink something. It's going to be okay. Verse 38, and when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. I think there's a lot of preaching on that text, some good, some not so good, but let's keep moving because I want to get started 9:52. Verse 39, landfall. When it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they'd taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea and loosed the rudder bands and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind and made towards shore. That sounds like somebody who's writing about like he knows ships. You know, Luke. Anyways, I got to keep going. Anyways, falling into a place where the two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart struck fast and remained immovable. The hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' council said, kill all the prisoners, lest anybody escape. Because they landed at this place called Malta, right? And they said, kill them all. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, you don't want to let Paul go at this point, right? He's been a valuable asset at the very least. Willing to save Paul, said, hey, everybody who can swim, cast yourselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass, they all escaped safe to land. You say, okay, we're done with Sunday school. Actually, I plan to cover the first 10 verses, so stick with me another 3-4 minutes. Can you do that, saints? All right, thank you. So they arrive on Melita or Malta. Verse 2 says, and the barbarous people showed us no little kindness. When I read barbarous people in the King James, I think of like the old barbarian picture with like bones through the noses and face paint. That's not what's going on here at all. These are really nice civilized people. Just barbarous has to do with alien or foreigners or people who are not Jews or Roman citizens, right? Does that make sense? They're not like Greeks and Roman. They're just people who are assumed to be less civilized and less advanced. But these are not like cannibals and headhunters. How do you know? Well, they didn't eat them. I know, but look. So they showed him a little kindness. They were very hospitable. So Paul gathered some sticks, laid them out on the fire. A viper came out, bit his hand. And when the barbarians saw that the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom, though he escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. Clearly God's judgment is on this man. He must be a murderer. Superstition and assumptions are not, they don't help you. Oh, yeah, we don't do that anymore. Are you kidding me? Open up Facebook for like 5 seconds. It's everywhere. Oh, man, I got a great tax refund. God must be smiling on me. You say, no, we're giving God the glory. I'm not against giving God the glory. But that kind of superstition can actually be really harmful because Hugh Hefner probably got a pretty good tax return. In other words, the circumstances of your life are not direct reflections of God's favor on you. It's fact. Otherwise, God would be really upset with Paul because Paul spent like his whole life in prison. God wouldn't have liked Jesus too much because Jesus was wrongfully crucified. You understand what I'm saying? So anyways, the result was he shook the beast off into the fire and felt no harm. And they looked, and when he should have been dead, they said, oh yeah, they changed their mind. They said, this guy's not a murderer, he's a god, right? So their superstition didn't change. Are you following me? I know I'm done in like 1 minute. Hang in there with me. Their superstition didn't change. It just shifted from, this guy's a murderer because he got bit by a snake, to this guy must be a god because he didn't die from a snake bite. Their superstition didn't change. Anyways, last point. Verses 7 through 10. What do you see Paul doing? He just got shipwrecked on an island, barely survived the ordeal, and the very first thing he does is what? Starts telling the good news about Jesus to some people he just met. You say, well, he sounds like a real Bible thumper. Well, he didn't have Bibles. He helped write it. All right, so touche. That was supposed to be funny. All right, anyways. He didn't have a Bible thump. He was just saying, look, I don't believe that my being here is a total blind coincidence. I think I'm supposed to be here so that I can tell these people about Jesus. You know what I'm saying? In other words, from this Bible study hour, we're going to continue in verse 28 in our morning hour, all right? But for this lesson so far, we have seen a lot of things go wrong in Paul's life, and yet, the entire time, Paul was still exactly where he was supposed to be. That makes sense so far? We're going to pick up from that when we go into our morning meeting sermon here in the 10 o'clock hour. So let's take a break, about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We'll hang out, and then we're going to sing a couple songs. I know it's like half empty because we have a whole lot of sick people, but please, And yes, I'm going to say it's going to be a short sermon, and you have to believe me this time. I only have 1 page of notes. All right. All right. I'll see you guys in about 5-10 minutes.